everyone, and welcome to the Sussex Azure User Group YouTube channel. I'm back with my colleague and friend Jack. Hey Jack, how you doing?
Yeah, not bad, Ryan. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good, thank you. Raining a lot this week, but yeah, we're slowly getting towards spring, so it's all good.
It's definitely wet out there today. Yeah, so I went for a walk at lunchtime and I came back caked in mud and all that good stuff of being in the South Downs. So yeah, it's wet, but hey, it's more daylight. That's a good thing.
Yeah, we're getting a good work. So this week we're going to talk about Azure Firewall Premium. So this is something that's just gone into preview as of yesterday. We're recording this on the 17th of Feb. So yeah, big announcement yesterday, and Jack and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to not only talk about some of the new features, but actually just quickly jump into the portal, and Jack's going to show us exactly what they look like, how you configure them, and everything else.
Yeah, with the caveat of I've only been playing with it since yesterday as well, since it got announced. So yeah, we'll certainly show you how to spin one up and go into that. So I think with that in mind, Ryan, obviously we know that things in Azure take a little while to deploy, especially firewalls because it's spinning up multiple instances
Yeah.
behind the scenes. So let's get straight into it, and then we can talk about the pros and cons about it in a little bit. But let's get the deployment kicked off if that's all right.
Yeah, that sounds good. So yeah, we're going to do this real time with you. We're not going to skip ahead. So at least you've got a feel of exactly how long this is going to take and how quickly you can stand it up. So I think it takes a while to provision the public IP and stuff like that. So let's jump into your portal, Jack, get one provisioned, and then we'll spend the time after that to talk about the new features while we wait for it to deploy.
Yeah, sounds good. So in true Blue Peter fashion, here's a resource script that I built earlier, and it's got a key vault in there, and we'll get onto that later. But to add that new Azure Firewall Premium, you're still going into the marketplace and just looking for firewall. So if you click on the firewall here and hit create, and then when you get into this experience, obviously you need to select your subscription and your resource group, and we need to give it a name. So let's just call this SALG Azure Firewall Premium 001. And select our region, so we can say put this in North Europe if I could spell. And then we're not worried about availability zones for now, but you can see those options are there. And this is the new bit that's been enabled, as we can see, right? So we want to select premium, and we need to associate a premium firewall policy to it. So I've got a couple of policies from other places, but I'm actually going to add a new one in here, so I can call this SALG Azure Firewall policy 001. And I'll put a P on there to keep it consistent, and let's pop that in the same region. And you'll notice that these two policy tiers, and we'll get onto that in a little bit more detail later on, but make sure it's premium if you're deploying the premium tier. And hit yes, and that's going to do that for us. I need to create a new VNet because I haven't got one, so let's just call this SALG Azure Firewall VNet 001, and let's give it an address space of, I don't know, 10.96. Something like that, that'll do. And then
It's nice that it specifies that subnet name before. I remember you had to manually create one and make sure you got the spelling and the formatting right for that firewall
so
subnet.
many nice improvements to like the creation blaze that have just keep happening as every time I come back in I'm like, oh, that's nice that they fixed that, and it's nice they fixed this. So yeah, it's all good. And that's complaining because I haven't typed that properly, so another good catch. And let's create another public IP. So Azure Firewall Premium PIP 001. Create that.
And that forced tunneling box, Jack, what would that do if you were to just enable that off by default?
Yeah, so I don't think forced tunneling is supported with a preview of the Azure Firewall Premium. We'll definitely check that and go into the docs in a second. But if I was to tick that, it would basically force all traffic to go through my firewall, and I think it would also give me an option to create another management subnet, because actually by forced tunneling, we break the management plane traffic of the firewall, so we need to create another subnet that the management traffic can go out of. But effectively, if you're in a forced tunneling scenario, which is very rare, that is supported, but I don't think it is for the preview of premium. But we'll get into
Okay,
that in
good
a
to know.
sec.
So don't tick that unless you
Don't do
really
that box
want
unless you
to.
really need to. Read the
Yeah.
docs before, but we'll give you some links to those in a second. So all that good stuff. Tags. Who puts tags on things? Honestly, definitely put tags on if you're doing something in production. But for the speed of this, we won't. And cool, and that's it. We're off and running, right? So that's going to run and get into it. So while that's off and running, I think let's have a little chat about what this really brings to the table. Why is your firewall premium is different to standard? What's some of the key things that you've taken away like from the announcement, Ryan?
Yeah, one of the big things for me is yes, actually, before I dig into that, we were talking about this in a podcast, right, around how Azure Firewall has matured over the last year or so since it was first announced, and we were compared to, existing kind of next generation firewalls that are out there in the market. And, I'm sure a lot of people have got the decision of, do I deploy something like a Checkpoint or a Palo Alto or a Cisco or something like that in Azure as an appliance, which is effectively, a virtual machine, and you need to make it resilient, and you need to kind of do all these things, or do you take advantage of Azure Firewall, which is purely PaaS based, it auto scales, you don't have to make it resilient. We saw from the setup there that it supports availability zones as well, so super resilient in terms of how it exists in a region. And to see the premium tier come out has been awesome in terms of those next gen features, because as we said before, Azure Firewall is a great concept because it's PaaS based, but it's missing some of those next gen features that something like a Palo Alto would have. So I guess let's start with like TLS inspection. That's something it didn't have before. That's something that a lot of the main vendors have now.
Yeah, and that's a really big thing in sort of more enterprise scenarios, right? They want to decrypt all the traffic for like HTTPS websites and SSL traffic from things like Windows Virtual Desktop or just your servers that are going out to the internet, right? But you want to be able to inspect what's actually inside that. And obviously, as part of a TLS, we don't let you do that. The firewall can't break it. But now with TLS Inspection available to Azure Firewall Premium, like some of those next gen ones have got, you effectively can do like a man in the middle approach, and the firewall can decrypt what's going on. So you can decrypt that packet. It can work out what's going on inside that SSL or TLS packet, and therefore take some actions on it. So it can inspect the URL properly, it can see what's part of that header, all those things that your next gen firewalls can do on prem, we can now do in a PaaS service in the cloud, which is really nice. It obviously still comes with the same setup things, so you need a certificate, hence why we've got that key vault in there, and we'll dive into that in a bit. But you need a certificate that's trusted, and on the docs pages that we'll put some links to in a second, or in the show notes, so definitely check below, because we'll leave a load of links to the new docs in there. There's a lot of CA work to do. You need to make sure the certificate is valid and in certain formats and doesn't have a password on, and but it's very well documented. I think that's one thing that I've noticed from this release. The docs are really, really good straight out of the blocks. So definitely go and check out the docs for these features, because there's really detailed guidance on setting it all up. But yeah, TLS inspection, enterprise customers will be super over the moon to see that. I think is a nice enterprise feature to bring in. I think the big feature for me, if I was to pick a feature, is web categories.
Interesting. Okay.
URL filtering has always sort of been there, or FQDM filtering was there before, and URL filtering we're probably going to cover two features in this part, but the URL filtering on Azure Firewall Standard was just like, if we had sussexazure.uk/episode/1, right, for example, actually before the Azure Firewall Standard would only evaluate the sussexazure.uk bit at the beginning, right? It wouldn't care about the path. Yeah. Now with the URL filtering improvements in Premium, we evaluate the whole path. For HTTP traffic and HTTPS. However, you do need to configure the TLS inspection for the HTTPS stuff to work, and that's again called out in the docs, so worth noting. But that's really nice. And then a sort of an advancement on that, instead of you having to list all your websites you want to allow or block and all that stuff, we've now built in that web category. So if you ever use something like a Paolo or a FortiGate or any of those other sort of MVAs that are out there that have that nice sort of pre-built list of website categories, so sports, news, all that sort of stuff, that's now available in Azure Firewall Premium as well, and same rules apply, right? So if you want a check on path, I think a really good example they call out in the docs here is, say you went to like bbc.co.uk, right? And you went to the website, that's fine, that's probably classed in one category, like maybe general or media. But then if you went to bbc.co.uk/news, if you don't enable TLS inspections that we can detect the path, because obviously it's probably a HTTPS website now, as most websites are, we won't be able to classify that as a news website. It will still fall back into its default category of general. So that's one really important thing to call out, that if you want to do most of the web nowadays, how many websites do you go on that aren't TLS or HTTPS?
I think your browser tells you off pretty quickly, doesn't it, if it's not HTTPS now?
So yeah, I think if you want to use some of those features about the full path filtering, you're definitely going to want to enable the TLS inspection stuff to make the rest of the features work to their full benefit. But even out of the blocks, they're going to be really, really beneficial to use.
And actually, going back to those web categories, you and I were just briefly looking at them before we stuck into this, and huge amount of categories, and some of the kind of subsections around like high bandwidth usage and it groups them in a really nice way. I was quite impressed to see that, and we'll show that in the demo in a minute. One of the features that I was really waiting for on this was IDPS, so intrusion detection and prevention system. When I've been speaking with customers around, what firewall to use, and we've said, have you taken a look at Azure Firewall because of the scale and everything else? And I said, yeah, but it doesn't have that kind of next gen intrusion detection, but now it does, right?
Yeah, it's always been a really hard conversation as well. Like, 'cause the threat intelligence has always been there as part of standard, which built off our security graph, and we've got lots of good meshing around Sentinel and all the signals that we get across our entire platform that go into the threat intelligence graph that Azure Firewall was using to work out known malicious IPs and all those sort of bits and pieces. But actually, you were right. It was a really hard conversation. If a customer was fixated on, I need IPS or IPDS, then it was almost like the threat intelligence graph was okay. Yeah, we can see it sort of solves half that challenge, but it's still not IPDS. And we're like, nah, okay, yeah, you've got a point. And then we'd be into that NVA conversation and back down that route. But with that IPDS announcement, I've already got a customer in mind that I know is going to be using the preview right now. They would have probably saw the announcement. I already pinged it to them. They're going to have deployed that because that was the one thing that was holding them back, and now they can go for it.
Absolutely. So they're pretty much the kind of the headline features, right, as part of Premium. How's the deployment going, Jack? Are we good to go in?
We are there, and it deployed quicker than I thought. So let's add it back into the stream, and let's have a little look. So as you can see, it's all completed, and as you can see, we've created some resources here. So the Azure Firewall itself, the firewall policy, public IP address, and a VNet. So that's all there. So if we go back to our resource group, and we can see all these lovely features deployed in here, and we've got our firewall. So let's drill into our firewall, and as we can see, we've got the policy assigned that we created at the beginning, but we could change that if we wanted to, and we can see which rules. Now, it's important to see that all of these things are mainly coming from the firewall policy, so you won't see a lot of the details here apart from sort of its public IP configuration and adding more, but actually a lot of the policy configuration of all these new settings are actually done on the policy. So let's go into the policy.
It's probably worth explaining Firewall Manager, right, at this point as well.
Yeah, really good call out, actually. Thanks for stopping me there. So Firewall Manager is basically a way of grouping all of your firewall rules together. Now, you could just have one firewall policy in Firewall Manager per firewall if you wanted to. There's nothing stopping you doing that, to keep it simple. However, you think about a large corporate or an enterprise environment where they may have a default rule set across the world, and then each individual geolocation may have different rule sets they want to use, but actually you need to enforce that the rules that are applied worldwide actually happen. So you can actually tier all your firewall policies and sort of set inheritance models, and therefore all your groups get grouped together, and then that final policy you would choose that lower level, like maybe level 3 policy that applies to only UK firewalls to your firewall, but it's actually going to inherit everything above it from the other firewalls that have come in. And I think are really important. We saw that policy standard or premium earlier when we were creating it. If you've got standard policies today because you've deployed Azure Firewall standard before, you can actually inherit the standard rules into your premium rules as well. So you haven't got to go and rewrite all your rule bases or copy them or convert them, but you can just basically ingest them into a premium policy and then apply that to your Azure Firewall Premium as well. So, really nice to see that from day one in a preview.
Yeah, awesome. So we're in the policy.
Yeah, we are in the policy. Yeah, final thing on the Firewall Manager. If any of you use something like Forti Manager or Palo Alto's Panorama, which is built managing multiple firewalls at scale and keeping the rule set sort of in check and doing that, Azure Firewall Manager is the exact cloud version of that. So really good comparison to make. So yeah, as you said, we're in the firewall policy here, and as you can see, we've got lots of nice shiny new things in preview down the left hand side. So we talked about TLS inspection right off the start. So as you can see, we can click on TLS inspection here and it's disabled, but we can enable that, and it's instantly going to ask us what's the managed identity that I should use, and then what key vault is my key stored in, right? So we can go and do that. We're obviously not going to go through that as part of the demo because it's quite a complicated setup, but you can see you need to have it in a key vault. And I think one really quick thing that I'll do is if I grab the link to the documentation, and I'll just bring that into here, you can see that this is the documentation for the certificates, and it tells you what you need to do and how this sort of works. So as we said, like man in the middle, user go and connects to the website. On the way back, it's decrypted and we can work out what's going on. So all explained here. Here's the requirements for the certificate, where it needs to go, and really does step by step on what you need to give permissions wise. And the managed identity is basically what the firewall is going to use to go and retrieve that certificate. But some nice good steps in here about how to use that. So we'll leave a link to this in the show notes. But you can definitely just go and browse to the Azure Firewall. It's under the concept section on the Azure Firewall docs. So back to there, so you can enable that and save it. I think one really good thing they've called out in the docs as well is it says like it can take like 5 to 10 minutes for it to sync. Like once you've configured the policy and the certificate, you need to sort of give it 10-15 minutes for all of the firewall nodes to go and pull that certificate and update. So be aware that even though it says it's completed, you need to give it some time to replicate. So we won't enable that. We'll leave that as disabled, and we'll discard our changes. We've then got all the standard stuff. So IPDS is another new feature, and very similar to the threat intelligence, right? Alert and deny. So do you just want to be told about it and the logs to reflect that, or actually do you want to take action? And again, you can select those. And then along here, this seems to be quite a new thing in the portal we've been talking about recently, Brian. Like things are evolving. These new mini blades within blades that we've been getting. So again, we've broken into this model. So say there was a particular IPDS signature that was being hit all the time, and you didn't want that to have an effect, or it was breaking one of your applications, or something like that. You could put in the signature ID here, and that's probably not a valid signature ID, but you need to check. And then you can say disable, alert on this, deny on this. So you can override if you've put that in place, which is really nice to see. And also not to be a PowerShell or a CLI thing out of the box. Actually having the portal experience is going to make this a lot more accessible to a lot more users, which is great to see. There's also a bypass list as well. So if you want to exclude a certain IP or destination that stuff's going to, you can do that as well. So really nice feature to see of the IPDS. And again, it's all in the documentation. So if you want to go into the Firewall Premium features, this is a really nice diagram. Actually, I'm definitely going to be stealing this and using this a lot.
Same here.
But you can see a lot of the bits and pieces, and it takes you off to the various sections where you can get more info about the new tiers and some of the known issues and all those bits out of the box. So definitely check those out. So
Jack, just jumping back to the first pane of IDPS, the alerting, right? So somebody that's new to Azure Firewall that is deploying this from scratch, how would they surface those alerts? How would they receive those alerts? Would that just go to Azure Monitor?
Correct. Yeah, so they go to a log analytics workspace, which technically falls under that Azure Monitor, the banner. There's some workbooks for Azure Firewall Standard. Whether they've been updated for the new Premium, I'm not sure. But I'd imagine there'll just be additional fields in your log analytics workspace. So where you query the Azure Firewall logs, there'll just be some additional queries that come in, or additional columns for like IPDS took action, didn't take action, alert, deny, whatever. So you'd be able to surface that through there. So yeah, still going to a log analytics workspace, and that's probably something that's worth calling out to configure that. If we just go back to the firewall, make sure you've got your diagnostic settings configured. So go into add diagnostic settings, tick these, send to your log analytics workspace, give it a name and hit save, and that's it. And then give it 5-10 minutes and all your logs will start appearing. So that's something very important to do from day one. And then as you can see, you can click on logs here and it would surface the logs, and we've got some pre-built queries here straight out. So if I was to say load to editor, you can see we've got the makeup of a query here, and obviously there's no data in mine because I haven't configured it, but you can see there's the makeup of a query in here that you could edit if there was some data in here.
That's great, because you can start to create some nice dashboards from those log analytics workspaces, pin them to your Azure dashboard, make it look nice, see the amount, the amount of threats potentially that are coming in, traffic, throughput, all that kind of goodness.
Yeah, and I think they've got some good metrics in here as well. So if you want more metric based, so like NAT port exhaustion, or your state, or how many rules are being hit, or the throughput or data process, you've got those all here as well. And yeah, as you say, Ryan, pin them to your dashboards, put them in your workbooks, all that sort of stuff.
Cool.
So back to the cool stuff in terms of firewall policy. So we talked about that. I think this is really important to call out. So secure virtual hubs. So it's reading the docs. The Azure Firewall Premium is not supported in virtual WAN secure hubs today. It is in preview. It's not supported. So don't try that. It's only supported in your sort of traditional hub and spoke approach. So don't obviously put this in secure virtual WAN hubs, because it's not going to work. And you've still got all the same features, so all the DNS stuff that came out recently for Azure Firewall, that's all still applicable to Azure Firewall Premium, so go and use that. Some really nice features there. And DNS is really important for a lot of the URL stuff to ensure that all of your clients are resolving to the same IP address so that the rules can match. Because what you don't want is, say, your PC, Ryan, say you're on a WVD VM and you wanted to go to, I don't know, the Sussex Azure User Group website, right? And you resolved a particular IP address for that website and you were doing an FQDM match, and then the firewall doing that lookup query to say, okay, what's the IP address for Sussex Azure, and it getting a different reply because, we're load balancing or something like that. Obviously, if we're not getting the same response, you're then going to get a bad experience for the user because it's not going to match what the firewall thinks, and you're going to get denied. So using things like DNS proxy and pointing all your clients to the Azure Firewall to access the DNS server, and then setting your Azure Firewall to point to your custom DNS server in your VNet, or maybe you want to use the Azure DNS. Making sure that DNS sort of journey is consistent throughout is super vital for those sort of FQDM rules.
Cool.
And then
should we take a look at URL filtering?
URL filtering is a good place to go. So let's go into our application rules, and we need to add a rule collection to find that. And obviously, same things apply. Typical hierarchy that's explained in the Azure Firewall docs around rule collections. So I'll just call that test. But and I don't know. Let's say call this block Google. And we can say, from anywhere internally on HTTP and HTTPS, and we can say web categories now, which is great to see. Now, obviously, that's not really going to apply. So if I said, let's say block news instead, see if that's a category. As you can see, we've got all these lovely categories here. And as Ryan said, grouped in a really nice fashion, so high bandwidth, business use, and we got the search stuff as always. So there you go, we got news. So really nice filter. So I can tick these, go, yep, don't want people accessing those, and that's pretty much it. Off it goes. This is obviously going to allow that, and I'm conscious that I may be missing some fields.
I think it's because you've not configured TLS inspection, right? So you can't select it.
And because I haven't configured it, because I've got HTTPS defined, it's probably kicking off a little bit. So I'll probably get some other features. And as you can see, URL now comes back because I've not selected that. So you can see that all in here.
It's cool that dynamically changes though as you change the fields.
So much clever logic being put in the portal nowadays to stop you having bad experiences, which is really nice to see. And as you can see, I can set this to be allowed, denied, and set the priority if I want to group those rules. But all in here, all happy days. So that's really nice to see. And if we add another one, say like block URL, wow, there we go, that's better. And if I do again star, and I just do HTTP because I haven't got the TLS configured, I can say URL, and I can put in full pass now. And you can see the example is suggesting I can put a pass. So I could put, Sussex Azure.uk/podcast, for example. Say didn't want people to go to our podcast, which is obviously not what we want. So we'll definitely make sure it's an allow rule. But that will now evaluate if I had if it was a HTTP website, it would evaluate. If I put the HTTPS in there as well, and I had TLS inspection configured, that would also work. But as you can see, it's saying invalid protocol. You cannot inspect URLs without TLS inspection. So some really, really good logic in here, as you said, Ryan.
Awesome. Great. So that was kind of a whistle-stop tour, really, of some of the new features of Azure Firewall Premium. If you like, the content in here, and we'll try to keep it short and snappy in terms of, showing you the new features, so you can, get that kind of jump start on getting this deployed. Then, please leave a comment, and any feedback in terms of other stuff that you want to see. I'm already thinking maybe we mentioned log analytics earlier. Maybe we could do some demos on some basic custom queries, pushing that into some nice dashboards and things like that. But feedbacks are always welcome. And thanks for viewing, and we'll see you on the next one.